for our own notes. Perfect. So we are here for the Equity Committee for the Council on Homelessness. And I'm going to drop in the chat. We actually have the agenda posted. So if people want to follow along, because there's like a bunch of materials that we will be looking at today. Because there are so many folks, I think we'll have people introduce themselves in the chat. But I did just want to do a quick roll call of the council members that are officially on this committee. So Janae Thomas, I see that you're here.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. Joe Bruno. You can either say here in the chat or just unmute so we can make sure you are.
I'm here.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Juno, I saw Juno. Oh, there's Juno.
Hello.
Hey.
Juno here, pronouns they, them, or she, her. Nice to see everybody.
Awesome, good to see you. Kiva.
Here.
I see you. Leslie Gleason.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome, thank you. I don't see Pat Mims and I do see Wayne Earl.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Yay, this is great turnout. So we have 7 members of the Council on Homelessness on this committee, but we also are very excited to have so many community members present. And I wanted to move, I'm going to actually share screen. Oh, I also, Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Jamie Schechter, she, her. I'm with H3 and one of the 3 Jamies that you'll probably see throughout your committee meeting time.
Just to keep it exciting. So I am going to try and figure out how to just, for some reason, it's not letting me share just my, hold on one second. Well, we're going to try it this way. So I am going to share our agenda. So today we did welcome and roll call. I want to do a quick pass through the minutes from last meeting and see if anybody has questions, comments, edits. We're going to do a really quick review of the work plan for this committee. Jamie Schechter is going to, we'll talk about, as part of the work plan, this thing about surveys. And then we're going to do some deep dives into some work that was happening between meetings relating to surveys. And then at the end, we're going to touch base about this idea of setting some formal definitions for things relating to equity for our community. So just want to take a minute, make sure does anybody have questions about the agenda? And I'll say as we go, like this is, I know it's sort of formal, but also feel free to like raise your hand, raise your little virtual hand, unmute if you have questions or comments as we go on. So the minutes, let me just pull those up again. Oops, here we go. Great. Okay, so the minutes, these are minutes from the last meeting. They were posted in advance. And really what we did last meeting was we reviewed all the educational materials that we currently have. Actually, let me back up for a minute. So just to ground, let me go through the minutes and then I'll remind folks. So the thing to know about this committee is the primary objective for 2023 is to really focus on leveling the playing field in terms of making sure anybody that's experiencing homelessness or is at risk of homelessness has the information they need about how to access services and kind of understands like what to expect. So that's sort of the framework for the work we're doing all year. So that's why we're talking about all these educational materials. We looked at what already exists. Yep, Joe, go ahead.
Can we parking lot something, please?
Mm-hmm.
I know that this conversation is around the material getting to the people who are in, like you were saying, are homeless or about to be homeless. And I'm wondering if we can also drive another train parallel to this that is getting material to the proper representation. Example being the protocol that I looked at for shelters, like to update that material and then take that material to the proper people who do the encampments and the sweeps and stuff of that sort. And like I said, I know that's something totally different than what this is, but it's kind of raised. If we are going to have new material going to the community who uses our resources, we should also update the material and make sure it gets to the proper people who need that material. So again, parking lot, something that it was just something that came up and I wanted to
Yeah.
raise it here.
Can I ask you a clarifying question about that?
Yeah.
So are you talking about, so I think you're referring to like there's an encampment protocol. So say there's like a city or Caltrain or something wants to clear an encampment. There's a special protocol they're supposed to use?
Correct. And it I would suspect that it is our responsibility, H3, the COH, our responsibility to make sure that they have that proper up-to-date material.
Okay, so that's actually something that that's a great idea, because part of what we are talking about is like building channels. So
right.
some of this is about like the actual things that are going to go through those channels, but part of this is about building channels. So that's great. Yes, hold on to that.
Okay.
Thinking.
Perfect.
Looks like somebody else raised their hand, but I can't see who else raised their hand. Oh, Wayne, go ahead.
This is to add to that, just if talking about this specifically, if we could make sure there is one of those channels is self-serve, because I deal with a lot of people that do, in this specific example, outreach in their little private churches and
Yes.
organizations and whatnot.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yes. So you guys are totally on the right track. You're just a little early, so we're totally going to get to these things, but this is really, really important, because part of what we're going to get to in a minute, Wayne, is this amplifier list, which is where we're trying to capture all those big channels and the little channels. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the minutes. Just this is kind of what we did last month. And part of what we did was decide to break out some key working groups to focus in on some pieces you're going to see today. So any questions, feedback about minutes, any reason why we should not sort of accept them as the official minutes from last month? Okay, I see Joe has a thumbs up. Okay, great. So I wanted to talk next, just review the work plan that this committee put together, so that we would have an idea about how to get the work done in the year. So this is the overall goal. By the end of this year, we want to create accessible information, outreach and educational materials to engage underserved and or previously unreached communities in our county, so that people experiencing or at risk of homelessness have equitable access to housing resources and housing outcomes. Right? If somebody doesn't even know about services, they can't possibly get housed. So we really want to make sure, just at the very beginning, we level the playing field by making sure everybody has the same information about how to connect with services and kind of how the process works. So Q1, which we are in, we said that we would assess the kind of stuff that we already have, which we did a quick review of that last month. We're going to identify key target populations, which we've done, and identify current information on channels and amplifiers. And we are doing that, actually. We are in the middle of that right now. So you can see what I posted. I sort of point to, I say if we've already accomplished these things. So we've reviewed a lot of this stuff. We've created working groups. We've developed a list of amplifiers, which we're going to look at more. One of the things that we need to probably drill down a little bit more, and Jamie's going to help us with that, is like measuring how we're doing with all of these. Every quarter, are we measuring and looking at our accomplishments, and are they telling us that we're doing what we said we wanted to do? What we're moving into in this second month is starting to, we said we wanted to draft like a survey or figure out a way to get information and input from what we're calling amplifiers. So these are the folks like Wayne that you discussed and Juno who you discussed. Basically anybody who might be having contact with people experiencing homelessness. Could be homeless service providers, could be church groups, could be law enforcement, could be folks in benefits departments. It could be a really broad range of folks. We want to ask them some specific questions about what they need to be able to get information out to people that are crossing their radar that need to know this stuff. And doing the same thing with people that are actually the end users of these services and the end recipients of like a flyer or whatever the messages are. So what, let me just go back up. So that was kind of the quick work plan review, and a little bit about what we're going to do today, which is really focus on these amplifier and people with lived experience tools. Like, we want to get a bunch of information first, and then we'll look more at the work plan. The next phase is to start to draft some stuff based on the feedback we're going to get. So Jamie, well, actually, let me just pause there. So do people have any questions, like big picture, what we're trying to do this year, what we're trying to do this meeting? Yep, Wayne, go ahead.
Sorry, it's my first meeting
Yeah.
as part of the committee, so I'm kind of just getting caught up to speed. If let me reflect back, what I believe I'm hearing is that
Great.
we are reaching out to more people to provide people access to the resources that we have as a COC. And so that the goal is a higher volume of requesting resources through the channels that resources are requested in the COC. Is that correct?
Close. So right now, what we're doing is we are, so these two surveys that we're going to talk about, we basically want to do a temperature check. What do you guys, these two groups, right? If we're talking about sort of these amplifiers and then people with lived experience, where are you getting information right now? What do you know? What do you want to know? What do you want it to look like? And then we're going to take all that information and go and have some more working groups here and actually do some tinkering. Maybe we create a new or different flyer. Maybe we create some videos. Maybe there's some billboards. And then once we have all those pretty shiny things created, at the same time, we have also been building this network of all of these channels to get them out through. So the work right now is to really figure out what's current state and what do people need, so that we as a group then have that information both from the people that are like handing out the flyers and the people, I'm just using flyers as an example, and the people that are taking the flyers to use them. What do you want stuff to look like? Is what's out there meeting your needs? Are there kinds of messages, images, words? How do we make this the most appealing, relevant, and culturally competent, frankly, or culturally relative to our community, to make sure people are recognizing, hey, this stuff is for me, and it's really clear about what I'm supposed to do. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Does that other folks that have been part of this work, does that track with your understanding?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. And I know, Wayne, like, I recognize for the folks just joining this committee, like, there's been so much work happening up to this point that you're jumping in the deep end.
It's all good. I'm good. I live at the firehouse. Don't trip.
Well, and I really appreciate you reflecting back. I totally encourage that with this work, especially because it's so complex. If you're not sure, just say like, okay, this is what I think I heard. That's really helpful. And that's actually honestly kind of what we want to do with these two groups, is like, here's what we've been putting out. Like, are the messages getting to you? How do we better communicate? Other folks have questions? Okay, so I want to flag that in this, and I'm going to put this in the chat again for anybody that's joining the party a little bit later. We are, we have also the draft surveys in there, but Jamie, I think you were going to talk us through, and I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Like, why are we even doing these surveys?
Hi, everyone. Okay, so our goal is to not make these decisions, plans, or whatnot in a vacuum, right? We want to make sure we're getting feedback on what will actually work. So we are putting our resources, our time, our energy, your expertise towards as effective of places as we can. And so to that end, we really want to make sure that the voices of the people that we're going to be working with, service providers and people with lived experience, currently experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, et cetera, are informing our plans moving forward. And you all know one of the easiest ways, or not so easy, but one of the most common ways of getting feedback is through surveying. And so I just wanted to kind of speak to what are the goals of these surveys and what they will and will not do for us, right? So the goals of the survey are to be able to cast a wide net. It would be really, really awesome if we could have, a sit down with all the folks in our community and have one-on-one in-depth discussions and get a lot of the good, juicy, qualitative information and narrative responses from the people who are living here. And that's a lot of time. And we don't want to take 10 years to do this, right? We want to make sure that we are keeping things moving. We're trying new things. We're making changes in a very dynamic way. And that means that, we want to be able to collect data differently. So we're trying to take all of the above approach: surveys, continue the cultivative conversations as we're working on things, all of that fun stuff. And so to that end, doing a survey makes us have a pretty easy mechanism to solicit feedback, right? We can email it out. We can print surveys out paper-wise and hand them out. We can ask questions. But there are limitations to surveying, and I'm putting on my previous evaluation hat right now. Surveys can be good tools, but you're only ever going to learn from a survey what you ask in the survey, right? And so a lot of times you want to throw the kitchen sink in the survey because you want to know so much, but that's not going to really yield you a great response rate. It's going to, potentially make people not want to finish a survey. And so what I think the groups are working on is really whittling down the surveys to what we think people will answer, what's the most important information, and it might raise more questions. If we're not getting all of our questions answered from the survey, that doesn't mean the survey wasn't successful. It just means it brought us more information to think about. So just want to flag that those are our survey limitations. A survey is only what a survey is, and it's going to be easier for folks with computer access or who are showing up to places where surveys are to be able to respond to it. So in that way, we might get different proportions of representation being responded to in our survey. Again, not a bad thing, just a realistic thing of what happens when you put out a survey, as you all probably know. But that's why we engage in other ways of soliciting feedback and asking for information from our community, because it's one way, not all the ways. So without further ado, and without trying to be doom and gloom about surveys, happy to kind of talk about the goals of this one. Like I said, to cast that wide net, get a lot of feedback, and to make sure that we're on the right track with developing our tools. We had a lot of really great ideas brainstormed in this group, billboards, radio ads, all of that. And it's really hard to do everything all at once. Might not even be the best thing to do everything all at once. So what we want to use these surveys for is to help us to drive our plans, our priorities, our resources, to how the committee is going to be working in partnership with the discussions that we have here, and kind of the outreach and connections that I know folks are doing on their own time, to make sure that we're being as effective as we can.
That's perfect framing, Jamie. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, so like in this committee and also in the working groups, like we really went round and round of like exactly what Jamie was saying of like a survey is not really ideal because you don't get necessarily the same kind of depth of knowledge that you would get from a focus group. But the thing I keep trying to figure out is like, where do we want to spend our resource, right? Do we want to spend all of our time up front? We could do a super intensive sort of data gathering process, but we honestly do have kind of finite resources. So I think the decision was made to do a survey, and then we are going to do this, what we would call an iterative process, right? We're going to then create some drafts and identify some key people that we can drill down further to really fine tune stuff and make sure that that smaller group is really representative of the diversity of our community. So, yep. And so I see, Kiva, we really need to hear from those persons who have not yet participated in the conversation. It's important to get new and fresh perspectives from other voices and communities, as we may already know what those currently working within the community have said or are saying. Yes, and actually, Kiva, that really speaks to why we've been trying to push this amplifier list far and wide. And we're going to review that. And this is like where I want people to put on their thinking hats about those far reaches that aren't the typical providers that we're thinking of. want to just create some space. Anybody have questions sort of about surveys in general or the thinking behind focusing on doing some surveys?
I'm not sure if this conversation has happened yet, but I'm wondering, will we have, I feel like we're all going to end up with multiple small surveys instead of, like, I feel like East County survey could be different than West County survey, but I don't know if it's going to be that direct, that focused.
Mhm.
But I was kind of, I mean, we have to know our audience.
Yep.
And I think every audience, because the county is so big.
Yep.
So I wasn't sure if we were going to do like multiple small surveys, or if
Let's
this
look
was
at it.
just one
Yeah.
main survey throughout the whole county.
It's a great question, Joe. And I think the short answer is there's going to be one survey, but we are really trying to capture and track information about where people are coming from and what demographic groups they belong to, including what region of the county, race and ethnicity, other factors that we know may influence rates of homelessness or kind of the lived experience. So I think this is a perfect segue into, let's take a look at what's been drafted. And so I'll say, oh, Jill has a question. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say on that note, I think one of the other perspectives on that is if you ask the same survey and distinguish what part of the county the response is, then it really can show a comparison and contrast of what's working and what's not in various parts of the county.
Totally. Exactly. Yes. And I think there are really different experiences depending on what part of the county you're in, for sure. So I want to just say one thing before we look at the survey, because we had, just in terms of process, we had this committee at the last committee meeting. We had lots of ideas for questions we could put on these. Then we had a smaller working group where we drilled down even more. So there was one related to the amplifier survey that had Joe and Rachel. And then one related to the people with lived experience survey that was Joe and Amanda Jenkins. And that was really, really important and great. And then I had our evaluation folks, our data folks, actually look at the survey from that like professional lens of, are we going to get useful information based on the way we've asked these questions? Are there ways to sort of tweak the survey to make it easier for people to take? So I'm saying this to say, especially for Rachel and Amanda and Joe, it might look different than it did when you last saw it. What I'm hoping to do today is for us to get the final version so that we can like get these suckers out and start getting information. But I just want to let you know, there've been like a bunch of different eyes on this, and part of why it might look really different from the last time is because I always call them our data nerds, like the people who are the experts. Yeah, exactly.
I have to say that I am grateful that you took it to the data nerds, because I love it. Yeah, I love that.
Good. And so there may be some ways that we can tweak wording, like especially for the people with lived experience one, if there's, especially for folks that are like working on the ground or have lived experience, if you're like, yeah, I know what you're trying to say, but like that does not translate into English for me. Well, we need to change it. We need it to be accessible. But so just keep that in mind as we go through. Okay, so the first one I want to go through is, come on. Okay, here we go. So this is the amplifier survey. So again, you can see your own version of this in the packet that's posted if this is hard for you to be able to read. So we have an introduction. And again, the target audience for this is, we have this big laundry list now of maybe almost 200 agencies, programs, church groups, feeding, programs, places that have food pantries. And we've tried to identify email contacts for that, basically saying, hey, you may have people coming across your radar who are experiencing homelessness. We want to make sure you have the tools you need to tell people how to get help. So that's kind of what this is explaining the context. So I'm just going to rest here for a minute. If there's feedback, and you can put it in the chat, you can unmute, but basically like this intro about, again, this is for like providers or people, amplifiers, people that will eventually be getting these materials out or be using. Okay, so the first question, the first section is sort of current state. So that's like, how are things right now? So first we wanted to know, like, how are you finding information? So working group folks, we had left this really open. And so sort of like, where do you get information as an open-ended question? The recommendation was to actually put, because people are more likely to actually answer a question if they just have to check a box, but there's also an option for other. So I have the flyer, I call 211. And again, we're also like giving them the links if they don't know what we're talking about. COC and Council on Homelessness meetings. And I'll mention up here, we say what H3 is, we say what the COC is in case people don't know what that is. I see Wayne and then Kiva.
And these are for amplifiers, and you're defining an amplifier as anyone who is carrying information to someone who is unhoused.
Yep.
So that could be anyone from an organization to a church group to somebody
Completely.
bringing meals.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or a community member that.
Okay.
Yep.
I would add to this check question here, since a lot of those, it's word of mouth. So it's who sent me. So if I'm volunteering for the Bay Area Rescue Mission, for example, the answer you might get is Barn told me. You know, it may not be accurate, but that's probably the answer that you would get.
Yep. So what's interesting, and one question that comes up for me, and Jamie, this is where I want your evaluator brain, is word of mouth useful information from us for us if we don't know who those mouths are? Do you know what I mean? And maybe there's like some skip pattern when we say word of mouth. Well, actually, so let me add that. So we also say,
You've got my
we don't,
process brain going.
we have other,
What you could do is you could split that out, right? Other service providers versus friends and family.
yep, okay, great.
You know, the people that I work with the most don't even know what a service provider is.
Okay, so yes, this is great. How would, so maybe when we get to the people with lived experience one, we would change the language. Does it feel okay to do this for other sort of like professionals?
Right, because isn't that the reason why we decided to take that question out? Because this is the survey that's directed to the system already. Like, so I don't know, word of mouth wouldn't be part of the system.
But it could be. So if we break
But
it
it
out, maybe
could be.
other service providers or friends or family, if it's say a church group or a.
The COC is much bigger than the COC.
For sure.
Yes,
Yes,
if
absolutely.
that makes any sense at all.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Like when you said it, I was gonna say word of mouth because as a church organization, for instance, my church organization talks to other church organizations. And I may not have a resource that they may have. I may not know information that they may have. So word of mouth is, in my opinion, a very valid place to put this for amplifiers. Well.
So does this cover it if we say other service providers, friends and family, social, religious, cultural groups? Would that capture kind of all those word of mouth sources?
I
Or
think that's
the majority of them?
I think that works. I think that works.
And I'll add later on, we ask, are there people that you think we should reach out to or add to our list? So that does come later. They could actually tell us who some of these are.
It's interesting. You think of an influencer on Instagram, right? There are similar networks of influencers doing on the ground work and encampments and outreach. You know, like if I say, do you know Jack in Concord? Probably half the people in this room know who I'm referring to. Yep. You know, and this is just one guy who's retired who feeds people twice a day, every day. You know, it's those informal networks that have the least contact with us that do the most work. So reaching those influencers, you know, my biggest weapon is my business card. I'm passing it out to everybody so that they can reach out to me directly. It puts a human face on an institution. They're calling Wayne and not the mission. You know, things like that. I don't know. This is exciting.
Wayne, later on, we say what other agencies, groups, and I added people should we
Uh-huh.
connect with to take the survey and or distribute the materials that are developed? Would that capture like
I think so.
the kind of, okay.
I was gonna say, Wayne, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said informal networks. We don't have to particularly add 3 or 4 more boxes. We can just add informal networks, i.e. other service providers, family, social, ... That way that we're not adding too many more boxes, because we know surveys, if they're too convoluted and too long, people may not tend to want to take them. But yeah, that informal networks thing works, because it's really important that we know even agencies and organizations, even government agencies, use word of mouth.
What do folks think about this? Oops.
I think this sounds really good. I was trying to formulate the words myself, especially for like, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, what about for people who are maybe influential in encampments and those kind of situations? And I think informal networks probably captures most of that.
Yeah. So I think about some of the outreach work that I do. I'm at the Castor encampment a couple of times a month, and it's a couple of different churches, a couple of different, and when we're in the encampments talking with folks, we're not from who employs us.
Right.
Well, I'm Pastor Wayne, and that's Vanessa, and that's Pastor Dave, so I think we'll get lots of names like this.
Great. I love it.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Laura had her hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Laura. Laura Sanchez, you can go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. I just want to mention, I recently gave a copy of the Contra Costa Cares flyer to the woman that cleans my house. And she lives in Antioch. And I don't know exactly how you access people who hire gardeners or house cleaners, but those people who are hired have contacts with people that others don't have contact with. And she was very interested. She's documented herself, but she knows undocumented people, and that program serves them. Now, that's not homeless, but people in that kind of work have contacts
That's
that
really
could
important.
be very useful in spreading information.
That's really helpful, Laura. Thank you. And I think, we need to think about that when we get to the amplifier list. I think that's great. Joe, is your hand up new or is that old?
Yeah, it's new. What's this question? This first question right here, it's just basically where you get your information from, right?
Yeah, just real basic, like where do you get
I
information?
noticed social media is not on there.
Oh, good point. Okay.
I mean, you have all of the websites and everything, but just regular old social media is not on there.
Yeah.
And then have them identify what social media is it, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Like, I think that way we can figure out how to get our electric flyers to those platforms. That's another social media niche that we can tap into.
Joe, that's a really, really good point. The Rescue Mission posts all over Facebook and Instagram, and we get a lot of people, reaching out for our programs through those posts. But we have a lot of direct help. Hey, can you help me out? So yeah, QR codes, exactly. We've got flyers. It says "You Matter" on it, and we get information how to get to our shelter, how to call us, and all of that we kind of pass out. Yeah.
So we're going to get to QR codes at the end. I'm really glad you're mentioning that. So, but this is great because we didn't ask about social media up here of like, where are you currently getting information?
By the way, that was Joe with the QR codes. I take no credit. I just read the chat.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to move to the next question. So the next question is, and again, for working group members, this is going to look a little different. Do you feel confident describing to someone how to access homeless services? Then the next question is, how would you explain it? So we had sort of mushed them together initially. And so if they're taking it electronically, it's sort of a, there's like a skip pattern. So if it says, yes, I feel confident, then we would ask them, how would you explain it? If they say no, we're not going to ask them that because they say they don't know how to.
Gotcha. I like that. Oh, we get so many wrong answers.
Yes. And that was initially, we left it really open. Like, what are people going to tell us? And then from like a survey design perspective, it's not great to have a ton of open-ended questions. So we did the same thing. Do you feel confident describing to someone the steps or processes and typical timelines to get services after making contact with the system? And then how would you describe it? So it's the same thing. The first is like, do you even know how to connect? And then what about what happens after you connect?
Oh, go ahead, Wayne. Sorry.
No, please, you go. Please, I've got a big mouth. I need to
Do
calm
we
down.
have a follow-up to that? Like, if by chance they have all the wrong information, are we going to be like, whoa, your information in the survey kind of red flagged us and we want to make sure you have the proper information?
Well, the idea is all these people are going to be added to our amplifier list so first thing I'll be doing, that's actually a great point.
Yeah,
So I'll
cool.
make sure like everybody that responds will get our accurate flyer just as a like, thanks. And by the way, here's our flyer that we have now. But that's a really good point, Joe. And maybe those are people that like we do a warm reach out to afterwards once we really get this stuff beefed up to make sure that we ask them to be like the testers for.
Yeah, I like that warm. I like that
them.
warm follow-up idea. That's great.
Kiva, go ahead.
In that we're talking to amplifiers mainly here, in that we're talking to amplifiers here, this will give us a good idea if they have written information, written referral information, written explanations as to how, and to follow up or segue off of what Joe said, if they do indicate that they have flyers or they have paperwork or they have written explanations, we can ask them to give us that, and then we can review that and see if they're correct as well.
Wayne, I see your hand up.
Yeah, having been asked and answered questions differently in an encampment versus encountering people on the street, it's the term homeless services. I know people in an encampment who don't want shelter or anything like that, but they want food. They want medical attention. How do I get in touch with, and in my mind, these are all the same set of services, but in so many of our amplifiers' mind, they're not.
This is, you are bringing up something that I completely missed, which is like, we have not in any way defined what these are. Like, what do we mean when we say homeless and housing services?
Because it's not just housing. It's all opportunities to provide help to someone. When you provide them help, you provide them hope, and they can ask and feel more comfortable to ask for additional help. It's a relationship back and forth so frequently.
So you bring up a really good point where I think we need to define what these mean in the description up front, I think for both surveys. So I'm just making some notes. So like crisis response services, and we would explain. And Jamie, I'm trying to remember actually if we have this already, like, we might actually have this in our like Measure X RFP description of like the kinds of services we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've probably crossed this bridge before, and sort of focus groups that we've done and all of that. So I'm sure we've got something to pull from.
Okay, but that's a really, really good point. So we're going to define what that means when we get up here. Okay, great.
Jamie.
Yeah.
That under those three things that you were listing, I'm inclined to feel like we should put in there human services, because food and clothing and showers, those are things that the unhoused need, that are not directly related to housing, but
Yep.
they still need those services. So
Yep, so we've got that captioned under crisis response, like that's what we kind of call crisis services. Are like food, clothing, showers, laundry, like the stuff you would get at a care center, or the things that our core mobile outreach teams are doing. Does that?
yes, and thank you for doing that, because when you said crisis, when I saw crisis services, what I saw was mental health, medical, something something that was an emergency or urgent for the moment. And that's why I said what I said, because when I saw crisis service, I didn't see food, clothing, shower. That's not what I saw.
Yep. Okay, so we'll work on those definitions based on some stuff we already have.
Well, and just to jump in really quickly, because I just pulled up the EHSD website, Employment and Human Services, because I was just kind of curious about what kind of language they use. Because it's, you know, across the board, and resources, assistance. I mean, there's several different words that sort of expand beyond housing and homelessness. Because it is a broad array of services that we're trying to offer to them.
And it is in the defining of these services that we have to be most careful with equity issues. There are some population segments that don't respond to the overtly rescue kind of language that sometimes are there. You know, like the word crisis, for example. You know,
sometimes we call them basic needs. I've seen it referred to that way.
I like that.
I saw Stephanie had her hand up and put it down. Didn't want to make sure we didn't miss you, Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure if this will fit in here, but you know, one of the big things that continues to happen, we have those services, but a lot of times they want their pets. And so maybe, you know, that's a preventive, one of the reasons why they won't come into the shelter sometimes is because of the pets.
You have perfect timing, because actually the next section is what do you want and need? And what we have is what kind of information do you want about homeless or housing services? And look, Stephanie, right here. And maybe, so we had crisis response, and maybe we rephrase that, but pets in shelters or housing is exactly a thing that comes up. Let me just check. Are we ready to move on from the like, what do you know, to what do you want or need?
Can I, there's one other thing that I missed real quick that I'm not sure if I missed it. I was multitasking, unfortunately, but you were talking about how to get the word out. And I was also thinking, you know, in our schools, you know, at the hospitals, even, you know, in the break rooms for the nurses and the doctors and, you know, different persons like that, because a lot of times they don't know. And I've encountered where social workers at our hospitals and stuff don't always know the resources that are out here. And lastly, our retail stores, because a lot of our homeless people come to them and the restaurant, and I often give that information.
Okay, that's great. I'm making notes when we get to our amplifiers list. Great. Okay. Let me just check the chat, and Jamie, you're doing great. Oh, bathroom. Okay, so this again, work group, this looks really different than what we initially thought about, but we thought it might be so that people can put, oops, I'm gonna say check all that apply.
And what's crisis response as opposed to crisis service, and why is that in there?
So, and we can it's totally my mistake. And this was basically, I was just trying to bucket things of like, and so we should probably land on what we want to call that. Let me just show you the buckets are sort of like crisis, or, you know, sort of urgent needs that are related to sort of basic needs. There's also like shelter. Oh, go ahead.
But isn't crisis response or crisis service more our systematic, like where we would bucket it? I would think if you scroll up a little bit based off of the question itself.
Oh, sorry, this way.
What information do you want about homeless, or like check all that apply? Then it would say access points to housing, daytime drop-in centers, how to, like, we don't need to identify what bucket it goes under. They don't.
That was mostly for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say
so
that.
we can take. I'm fine taking that out. Yeah.
I think that's internal. That might help with us collecting the data. We might know that, but I
Yeah.
don't think that they need to even, I don't know, it doesn't fit.
I don't disagree. I totally agree.
I
So
totally agree with that.
I
Okay.
totally, and even though these are amplifiers, I agree with that too, because we want to make sure that that the vision
Mhm.
is we're all on one page in regards to how we view what we're giving them, because how we view what we're giving our clients does impact how we actually give them,
Yes.
how we actually interact with them. So
Yes.
if we're viewing these things as a response to a crisis, then we're going to approach our clients as if they're in a crisis, and they may not define what they're in as a crisis. So we have to be cognizant of that.
That makes total. Okay.
The most important thing I can do in interacting with anybody is to support their dignity. And so, yeah, yeah. I think it's real important here, even with the amplifiers, because a lot of the amplifiers are just going to pass through whatever we show them. So they're not going to be thinking through these things, like we're trying to do.
And so then that would also mean we would take out the bucket of financial support, take that out. Housing, take that out.
Yeah.
Like
So
I didn't, my opinion on it wasn't because it was the word crisis or anything. It's just because the bucket's not needed. So would we also take out the financial support? And if we scroll down, it's got housing.
Yeah.
And there's other buckets in there too.
So one question is, do we want to separate homeless services from housing services? Because if you look at the housing, there are folks that are experiencing homelessness that are not interested in housing. And so maybe they want this first bucket of things. And then there are other people that do want this housing stuff. And so does it make more sense to separate those into two different things or leave them all together?
I would leave them all together and let people pick what they're comfortable looking at.
Sure.
I went to food pantries for a couple of months before I sought exit from homelessness, but I knew where everything was.
So actually, that's a question. So let's go through these and see if there are things that you want to edit or remove or add. So we have access points for homeless or housing services. So this is, for our language, it's like call, care, and core, right? Do people even know how to start? Information about daytime drop-in centers for basic needs. So I'm thinking about care centers in this way, but Wayne, what you just said made me wonder if we should also have one that's like how to get food or like separate from this, like separate from what's connected to the daytime drop-in centers.
I say that they're both, so the daytime drop-in centers are few and far between geographically.
Totally.
People are going to encounter some church that's feeding some lunch, or they're going to encounter SOS providing showers at an encampment a lot sooner than they'll encounter a day center. I'm wondering a way to collapse those so that we have a term that kind of refers to them all.
So is this like basic needs? Maybe it's not about care centers, but it's like basic needs, showers, laundry, food.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's other things.
Hygiene.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Bathrooms. Yep.
Legal.
Okay, so legal to me is different. So that's a good question. Does this capture the sort of basic needs piece?
Diapers and toiletries, I would add to that list.
Okay.
We see diapers every day, every day.
So what's interesting about this, where I'm getting a little stuck, is the information. Like if I want people to know about our 3 access points, and one of them is our care centers, they might not, well, I guess they would have some of this stuff. Okay, but that's helpful. So this is what people need. Let me just look in the chat. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
think about how the map of services looks different in my head when I'm on the streets.
Yep,
In an encampment
exactly.
versus our
That's-
head.
Yep,
So
that's why we need
when I was living in the Mervyn's building in Hayward, I thought in terms of, okay, I could go to this place for breakfast. I could go to Headco for lunch. I could go down here for needle exchange, all of
Yep.
these things. So I'm thinking local, I'm thinking walking distance usually, I'm thinking, you know, within a very short radius.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, and I bring that just because the care centers are wonderful, but there's lots of informal ones.
Yep.
That you're going to hear about on the street. The church that'll do your laundry for you, or the church that'll do a mailbox for you, for example. You know.
Right. Okay. Okay. So does this, like, the basic needs kind of captures that?
Yeah. There. I just brought up something. The needle exchange specifically. Is there harm reduction sites that we want to include on this as part of this information?
It's a good question.
Would that go under like medical services maybe? I mean, because that's one of the things that's not on here. And I think that also Kiva brought up too, that would go under medical services.
So.
Or drug services, I don't know. But then again, is that really housing and?
Well, so this, you're actually bringing up the question that I'm having, Joe, which is like, we are not trying to connect everyone with everything, really. So if we like step way back, my dream is that at the end of a year, after, if we did our job right, if you ask, hey, do you know how to connect with homeless services? They would say you would call 211, you go into a care center, or you connect with core outreach. Boom. From those points, you can get all this other information. Like for the sort of how to access things, what we may also end up doing is some kind of a like frequently asked questions document that maybe drills down into some of this stuff. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, we don't want to recreate the wheel. We don't want to recreate 211. We don't want to recreate, we don't want to make like various resource lists for things. But it would be helpful to know what people want.
Do you see how outreach can be so challenging? You know, like when I go to the Castro, I want every man, woman, child, I want everybody I want them to be out of there and housed and safe and well, you know, but that's a journey and a path, you know, and providing somebody with a meal and a discussion is a step on that path. You know, so if I'm thinking about this work in terms of a service provider or in terms of a COC, I'm thinking big system. But as someone praying with somebody and talking with somebody in an encampment, I'm thinking very human scale. You know,
sure.
But
so Wayne, here's my question. So say you're Joe Schmo and you don't work for BARM.
Yes.
And you are going into an encampment and you are having these conversations and you're having these meals and somebody says, you know what, I'm ready for help. If you don't work for BARM, what are you going to tell them? What are you going to give them? I'm going
to tell them to call 211.
Right.
You know,
or you're going to give them a flyer, or you're going to give them a thing. So that's who our target is.
Yes. But what I'm saying is there's two challenges with that, because 211 is the answer. Your answer, your goal, your dream is the answer. But my very first question is, what happens? You know, there is a long response time to get through to 211 and core and everything. You know, and what's the reality of someone's perception when they're in an encampment? They're going to create unofficial networks around, you know, so and that's how all these little church things happen. The COC evolves around the COC. How do we capture them both? You know, how do at the human level, at the relationship level, how do we capture them both without losing sight of either?
So I see Stephanie and Laura's hands raised, and I want to
Thanks, Jamie.
just kind of bring us back to what is the goal of this question in amplifying this information?
Mhm.
Because I think we're getting beyond what the survey can accomplish of how do we make sure that we're getting perfect information out there and bridging those gaps completely. Again, that's why we kind of try to set the limitations of the survey. So definitely I'll pass it to you.
Oh, did you call me?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I was just seeing on here disability services, like I seen a gentleman and he's walking down the street and you could tell he really needs a walker. I know we can't do it all, and then in the places that they are able to go, are they handicap accessible?
Yeah. So
do you have a chair with arms? Those are things that a lot of times a person with a disability, needs. If it's a shelter, what kind of bed do you have? If that bed is sitting way down to the ground, depending on what their disability is, how do they get in and out?
So does this capture options for people with disabilities? Is that broad enough to capture all those things? Maybe it's about shelter, maybe it's about housing.
Definitely housing. How do they access housing? Because that makes it, really difficult.
Jamie.
Yeah.
Before you go any further, stop.
Yes.
I think you do need to keep the word housing in for those specific things that we're talking about housing.
Okay, so we've got eviction help, how to get housing, how decisions get made about housing placements, what kinds of housing might be available, how to get a housing voucher, how long is the wait for housing. You feel like this should be?
That should be defined as specifically housing.
So should we make a separate section?
I thought those were just internal notes.
Yeah, I know. I heard that. But for the purposes of the survey, and those people taking the survey, I think that it's a good idea to specify that we're talking specifically about these things about housing. The other stuff is individual, but these specific resources we're asking you about are specifically housing resources. So I do get that you were talking, you put that in regards to the bucket and the funding.
Then it should be a different question.
That's what I'm wondering.
Question.
Should we have like what information?
If we're going to
do you want
specify it, it needs to be a separate question.
Yeah. So
folks feel strongly about that? Other people that are in this group?
I have a question for you, Kiva. What I think I'm hearing you say is the label housing isn't a loaded label like crisis services is, and it doesn't evoke different emotional responses in people.
Right. It does not. Yeah.
I think that's what I'm hearing you say. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Oh yeah, tenant protections and eviction. Thank you, Rachel. I see your tenant protections and assistance. So
I know we've been all over the place, but this is very useful to see what it's like to be out there trying to bring information to people, because it's not that simple, it's really not that simple.
Even for the service providers.
Yeah. I mean, this is why Barb says, just give us a call, we'll talk it through, and why so much of working with folks that are in encampments is relational discussions. What do you specifically need? Yeah.
So
Stephanie has a hand up.
Go ahead.
Again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably just forgot to lower it.
No worries.
Real quick though, I was wondering, we put it under disability, but I'm wondering, should we put it under what kind of housing might be available? Can we put for persons with disabilities, or we just want to leave broad, like for disabilities, families, youth?
So what if I do services for people with disabilities and also housing for people with disabilities as two
Oh.
separate things?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. So in terms of these other questions, and again, this is not going to be exhaustive, but we were trying to capture the most common questions. So I'll just go through these real quick. So we've got like how to connect to homeless or housing services, basic needs, how to connect with shelter, how much shelter is available in Contra Costa, and stuff about mobile outreach services, pets in shelter or housing, safe parking options, services available for families with children, storage of belongings, how to connect to emergency rental or utilities assistance, tenant protections and assistance, including evictions. I might just say evictions. How to get housing, how decisions get made about housing placements, what kind of housing might be available, how to get a housing voucher, how long the wait is for housing, services for people with disabilities, and housing for people with disabilities. There's also an other option. So if there's like something else that somebody thinks that they would want to know about, and I'll just step back for a minute. When we get all this stuff, we're not ever going to be able to put all this stuff on like a flyer, right? But this will help us decide, do we need to do a video that talks about some of these things? Do we need to do a frequently asked question that is, and I've actually have like drafted some things like that in the past that have just never really launched, so that we can answer some of these things for people.
16 years and I'm back in market segments in advertising.
Exactly. I mean, this is social marketing. What we're talking about is social marketing.
Yes.
Yes. Are there any, and I would just want to make sure we get through, I think we're good. We have an hour left, but I want to make sure that we get through the rest of this survey and get a chance to look at the amplifier survey too.
Jamie, right on the disability, you put /seniors.
Oh, yep.
And in the chat.
Yeah, on both of those.
Do we want to mix those two things together?
It generally is on most. I mean, when you look at a lot of different literature, they usually are /seniors disabilities. Yeah.
And
I'm
so
okay
is the
with it. I don't know how other
disabilities,
people might feel.
is the disabilities including both physical and mental?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
And should that also be like,
yep,
identified in there?
I do want to just put a caveat out there that it's likely we're going to do some wordsmithing after all of this, just because we want to make sure we're putting out something that's cleaned up and that people will read. Yes. You probably know very well how much attention span you get from people when you give them a survey, so we try and be as possible.
Yeah.
Jamie, it should say behavioral health, not mental health.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
Yep.
That was just me speaking, but there it is. Yep.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's always cleanup after the brainstorm. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So in this same section of like, what else do you want? We have what other information relating to homeless and housing services would be helpful to you as a provider or an individual working with this population. So this is like the opportunity for them to say anything else. Then we get into the tools. So this is where we're asking what tools would be most useful to share this information. So we have billboards. And again, we may not be able to do some of these, but we're just trying to see what do people think is the most useful. Billboards, business size cards. Maybe they want content that they can spread out through their networks. Flyers, posters, QR code. Joe, there's your QR code. Radio ads, social media, transit ads, TV ads, and videos.
Jamie, I might propose and see how this group feels about it. Maybe saying what are the top 5 tools you would select? Yes, I think people would really be inclined useful to choose everything.
That's really great.
Yep. I like that. Okay. I can already see in my head how Tay will answer that differently than folks older.
Yep. Great. So we're going to say at most 5. Boom. Okay, great. I love that. Okay. Then we're asking about languages. So we're assuming stuff is basically, it's going to be in English and Spanish. We're also asking if any other languages, if they would need stuff in any other languages and what would be the highest priority. And these are the languages, this is sort of based by some county pieces about like the most common languages, but we're also asking for other.
I want to bring up sign language. I feel like there needs to be some sort of like video highlight of sign language.
So video, I think if we did video, we would have closed captioning. That would be the way that we would address somebody that's hearing impaired, is that we would have closed captioning for sure in any video that we do. Do you feel like that would meet that need, Joe?
Not necessarily, because I don't know, sign language is its own language.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if we want to specify that as an option here, I guess is what I was saying.
We could, I mean, that's part of why I left this as other, is like there are lots of other languages in our community. These are the other most commonly requested or the largest populations. So my inclination is to not put ASL on there. And I don't know if Jamie or Jill, if you guys have any thoughts about this. ASL hasn't come up in terms of like written materials or video. Where I think it could come up is related to like in-person meetings, but that's kind of a different animal.
Maybe we check in with, and there's lots of organizations that probably give us some guidance on best practices for developing materials for people with hearing impairments.
Yep. Okay. Great. Let's do that.
I agree, because TTY is another venue, but that definitely can come under other.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
and so the only thing that I would say, Jamie, about anything in written materials is some of our outreach efforts in other areas, when we've done things in other languages in writing, is it's been discovered that there are people who don't read, who
Exactly.
can't. And so,
Yes.
you know, we need a variety of ways to reach people.
I love that you said that, Jill, because that actually takes us to this next question, which is, does your agency or group serve people at risk of or experiencing homelessness that also belong to any of the following populations? And one of the groups that we have is low to no literacy. So that's like, I mean, I think the description, like what I'm hearing is like, if somebody was hearing impaired and didn't read, then they would need a video in ASL. We can, you know, as Jamie said, we can like check in with some of our disability rights groups and see like if there's data. Because the other thing I'll say that we sort of talk about is like figuring out threshold languages, like what are the languages that are the most common, because we have, I don't even know how many languages are spoken in Contra Costa, probably at least 40. We're probably not going to translate things into all those languages, so we have to make decisions somewhere, and we want to make that decision based on data.
I remember someone bringing up in some committee that I was on here somewhere that there's 5 languages that everything needs to be translated into. I think, Jill, do you know what I'm referring to, or am I?
Yeah. These are the ones.
So it's the election division determines based on populations how many different languages the ballots need to be printed in. Yep. But again, when you're talking about other, our immigrant population, there is that issue of literacy. So no matter how many languages you print things in, if people don't read, they can't read.
Yep. And this is something also we're going to be working with our communications team for the health services, and they also are, I think, wrangle with this particular issue for lots of things about getting health information out. I'm sure they wrangled with it, getting information out about COVID. So we'll pick their brains too when it gets to the material development place. So the who and how you serve. So this list was generated from data about who tends to be the most impacted by homelessness in our community. So we've got Black African American, foster youth, Hispanic Latinx, we sort of lumped immigrants, refugees, asylees together. LGBTQIA, folks with low to no literacy, people with Native American or Indigenous heritage, non-English speakers, sort of broadly, we ask about languages separately, older adults, people with disabilities, including, and I'm going to change this to behavioral health, behavioral health and substance use challenges, reentry, transition-aged youth, people at risk of homelessness, people experiencing homelessness, unaccompanied minors, and veterans. Hopefully we have not left anything out. Again, we're, yeah, infographics, Joe. You know, we just want to, this is part of like building up this amplifier list too, is like, we want to know if we want to reach out to specific populations. We want to know if these folks are working with these different populations.
Is the reason why older adults isn't in there is because
It should be, there it is, older adults.
Oh, it is there.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Yep, it is. So then we want to know on average, how many people at risk of or experiencing homelessness does your agency or group have contact with in a month? Because initially we'd had like, do you ever run into folks? Well, yes, but that doesn't really tell us much. So, so we have in a month, 0 to 5, 6 to 20 in a month, or more than 21. So this also kind of tells us like how important that channel is for getting that information out. Not necessarily important, but it helps tell us like who's having a lot of contact and who's having less contact. So we figure out kind of, again, where to like focus our attention.
Can I raise something here that just
Sure.
hit me? So the person that we are asking that question, this specific question, do we want to know if they have HMIS access? So we're not like, we want to know, like,
we'll know if they
is
do.
that at all important?
No, we'll know if they do, because we're going to ask them about who they are, what agency they work for.
Okay, so that was the little niche that I was wondering, that I was questioning about this information. So
Yep.
we'll already know if they have HMIS
Totally.
access or if they're part of our system or not. Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that at the end, actually. So that's great. So like what regions, check all that apply. We just broke it really broadly into West, Central, and East. And so if they serve everywhere, they would say all of that. Jill, do you have, and maybe we need to, I think we actually, I'm realizing well.
Do people split central like in 2 pieces, north
Yeah,
and south?
I mean,
Are
that was.
Are you asking me? Yes, it should
Yep.
be South Central. It should be Central and South Central.
Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll add the, like what communities that includes, because I think people get really fuzzy about that.
And then the other thing is, you know, there's a division between East County and Far East County.
Far East County, yes.
Okay, great.
Can
Thank
we
you.
just all get along?
But it's important. It's
Do you
important
think
to
we
know.
could just put other, because sometimes people are transitioning from other areas?
Yeah, so I think for our purposes, we just care about, like, I actually, to be totally honest, I'm not really concerned if they work in another county. I want to know, like, do they have reach in these parts of the county? They can select all of them. So if they work in the whole county, then they would select all of these. If they are in just one part of the county, they would just pick one of those. What were you thinking, Stephanie?
I misread the question.
Oh.
You're right. Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
I was thinking that we're, you know, us serving, where do they come from? No problem.
Yep. Okay.
Well, did you say that you're going to be adding the cities?
Yeah.
Of each of those sections?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. And then we're asking, how do you share information about programs, services, or resources? So we basically want to know, you're an amplifier, what are your channels? So are they at events? Is it during meetings with other providers? Is it in person while meeting or providing services? Do they have newsletters? Do they send out physical mail? Are they making phone calls to people? Are they texting people? Do they have a website? Oh, social media is one we forgot.
I feel like this was the question that I was referring to earlier about word of mouth and how we expanded on that. Because I think all of this stuff was what we got from word of mouth. The
Yep.
phone calls, texts.
Yeah. And so this to me is like, as an agency, how are you sharing information with your clients? Because if it's like if it's a phone call, then we might be able to give them a script, right? Like maybe one of the things we do is we like develop a script for how they can describe in 3 sentences how to connect to services. If it's a text, we make sure that they know they can text the link to the flyer to somebody, like or that they know they can tell people how to text 211 if that's how that person communicates. Are there other things we haven't thought of around the actual channels? This is again how they would convey information to somebody who needs homeless services.
Do we put 211?
So this is 211 would be the thing that they give them. This is about the vehicle that they're going to use to give them information.
And that sparked something for me though, Stephanie, of like online resource boards, messaging places. So not quite social media, but I know that there's very robust like resource wikis out there that people access.
So what would you call that, a resource wiki? Like, I don't even know that language.
Like, I would say online resource boards, and then you can put in parentheses like 211 database, comma.
So I've not been homeless in Contra Costa. I was homeless in Alameda. I was homeless in Hayward. And one of the things, so I don't know if there's anything like that here. They had a flyer that everybody that had resources in Hayward put together. So we would know where food was served, all of this stuff. It was shared all around. That was pretty much the source of everything. I guess the question is local resources. Do we develop those here? I have no idea who developed the one in Hayward, but I remember running into it all the time.
So I'll just jump in here because this is, we did, for a long time, we had not necessarily through H3, but we had a flyer with all the various resources and it was used mostly in the reentry community. And it was basically just printed from 211 and they cut the funding for that. And so what is online now is that resource.
Yep.
So directing people online to access those resources, because you can search the 211 database for food or for, and all of that stuff is listed there.
Yeah, and Wayne, part of why we've moved away from that is because the amount of effort it took to keep those things up to date when things were constantly changing.
That makes sense.
Was a lot. And that's why we've really pushed people to 211 because they are staffed. They have somebody whose whole job it is to make sure that database is up to date. And they sometimes do their own, like they have different flyers that they put out that capture their most up-to-date resources, but like they're dated and it references back to them. And that's part of why we moved to the flyer with the 3 access points, was like, so we as a system didn't have to keep track of the 42,000 things going on. Rachel, I see your hand up.
Yeah, it's for this specific question.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where it would land for maybe like if you were putting a placement about your services in an email blast that an affinity group was putting out. Like I get, you know what I mean? Like if there's an aligned organization or maybe doing its work that cuts across your particular sector, but it's not your email blast, it's their email blast. And you say, hey, put me in the resource list or put a little spotlight on my organization there.
Where I think that might get captured is how are you, hold on one second, like content for your agency's blast emails or newsletters? Like, is that what you're thinking? Like they would?
No, because it would be what I'm saying is like, I'm an agency that provides X, but I think that my services might also apply to population Y that's actually served by this other agency. So I'm going to put information about my services in that other agency's newsletter. Does that make sense? And I just didn't see that reflected necessarily because it's not in my own newsletter. And it's
okay. So we've got,
I don't know if it's important enough to put it down there. I'm just like in the networks that I'm in, I get a lot of that kind of like cross sectional, intersectional stuff.
So would that, maybe we don't have emails in here. So I wonder
Okay.
if that's like emails is a separate thing and that could encompass.
I want to bring
Um,
attention to Amanda's post in the chat. This is part of why the flyer was such a good idea when I was on the street, because lack of phone, or, I cannot tell you how many times my phone got broken. But how do we address that? Or at least do we consider that, not having access to phone, or
Yeah.
not having access to two.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of why we have core. I mean, and I know you have to call to get to core. We have the care centers where people can physically walk in. That's, I mean, it's a challenge. I guess the question is like, how are people getting connected to services then? Like if you have a flyer that has a bunch of phone numbers, then what do you do with that if you don't have a phone? What's the,
Do we want to then, after this question here, ask a follow-up question of what hinders you from sharing this information with others? I feel like that would answer that. No? Maybe. Does the agency have already identified why some information doesn't get to their people? I don't know.
Oh, well, actually, I think we,
Oh, I like that.
hold on, we have a question. Oh, maybe it's in the other one. I think we do in the, and I don't know how much time we're going to have to get to that, but in the one about for the people's lived experience, we do ask, why do you not access services?
So
but
we would ask the same question of the service provider. Why aren't you sharing these services, or what's preventing you?
Well, and I think so up here we have the like, how do you get information? Do you feel confident describing? I'm just looking to see.
Yeah,
if this is captured.
I'm curious if those questions up there might tell us that. If they're not confident in sharing the information, if they don't check any of the boxes of where they get the information, that can tell us they're not sharing because they don't know if it's real, or they don't know what's out there. One of the things I want to be cautious of is, asking questions that we might not be able to provide resource for.
Exactly. I was like, we know it's an issue that people don't have phones. This committee is not going to solve that problem, and this committee is not going to be able to solve that problem for another agency. We kind of know that's a thing. But this question of like, how are these other ways? Maybe there's something that comes up about the other kinds of tools.
So
helps address that particular problem.
There's kind of a meta. I can see both sides of the coin. I think 2-on-1 is wonderful. And it's the clearinghouse of everything. And as a service provider and as a data geek and all of that stuff, I love 2-on-1. But on the flip side of that, there is a whole host of things that we do as an agency to work around the inability to access resources through 2-on-1 in a timely manner. We bring people into our shelter that we cannot serve unofficially because we need to wait a couple of days, and I mean a whole bunch of things that we do, like stopgap stuff. And my biggest concern about widely distributing 2-on-1 is if we're not enlarging that pipeline with more resources, then we are contributing to less equity, because the worst hope you can give is a false hope, and I hope that finding additional resources to make that 2-on-1 pipeline much wider, more well-staffed, more responsive is part of the purview of this committee.
Partially, and I will say we are always looking for ways to expand resources to 2-on-1.
Yeah.
And more to come on what that actually looks like.
Okay. And this is my tension between giving people a list of stuff they can go to in 2-on-1. For that's where that tension comes from.
Yep. And that's real, Wayne. Like that's real. And this has been something that we've heard for years. And I think part of what it reflects is the reality that our homeless system of care is under-resourced across the board.
Yes.
There's not
And-
enough core teams, there's not enough 211, there's not enough shelter. And so this actually speaks to part of the this like what would you describe as the steps or process and typical timelines? And this might be stuff, and we have in here sort of like how much shelter is available, how long does it take to get to housing? Like maybe there might be ways that like in sort of companion pieces or videos or whatever, like we can have information about, you know, how long you might expect to hear from somebody. Like you're not going to necessarily hear about from core that day. People should know that so that they aren't frustrated and then give up.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying, and there may be ways in our educational materials that we can not only tell people how to access services, but also help set realistic expectations about what will happen once they do.
Yeah.
Continue to try and improve the system as we're going.
Yeah, we as an agency, we do a lot of that, trying to walk people through that process. Yeah. I wish there was more resources. I really do. Really do.
Join the club. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so
Can
we're
we
at 3.
do the-
Okay.
Oh, I was gonna say, do you think you should do the top 5 on that one as well? Number 13?
We could. I mean, I'm actually curious, like I don't need them to choose the most. I'd be kind of curious from the back end to know, because if a lot of people are saying that they're doing social media, for example,
That's fine. I was just curious. I was just thinking, that way you kind of see what's really being used, who's or how many, how many people are using what and what seems to be the best ways getting out there.
we could, Jamie, from an eval perspective, do you have thoughts about that for this particular question? Like,
I think if we were to kind of look at it from that way, we would want to ask, what are the most helpful or effective ways that you share information? Choose your top 3 or 5 or something. So that way we could.
I'm trying to think, is that useful for us? That might help us narrow down the kinds of tools we build. Because again, we're not going to be able to build a tool that meets every single agency's needs. We are probably going to.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, like, what's really, is it 20 people using this and 1 person using this, and then you build a tool and it's really only 1 person using it.
Okay, so maybe I'll say, what are the top 3 ways your agency shares information about okay. Okay, so I'm going to just edit this real quickly. Oops, at post 3. Okay, so we are almost done with this one. So then at the end, we say we're like, hey, can we reach out to you for drafts once we have some drafts? Are you able to help us get surveys out to people with lived experience? How do you want to stay up to date on the homeless system of care? Their name, their title, their agency, and their email. And so this, Joe, to answer your question, we know who's in HMIS, so we'll be able to tell from that. Okay, so that's the amplifier one.
Rolling Zoom trainings for all this. Just guerrilla trainings everywhere. We're just going to train everybody.
I mean, this is like, this is a thing that we've talked about doing, is like a quarterly like COC 101 for people to understand this whole thing.
Well, and so that's what I've been thinking the last few minutes here, is trying to articulate how to bring exactly that up, because I feel like there should be some kind of introductory, hey, after we do the survey, or even before, I don't know where it comes in now that I think about it, but something along those lines needs to be addressed on.
Who else?
Was a train wreck. That was a train wreck in my head, because I just had like new thoughts that demolished my original thought.
Well, so question 17 is like, how do you want to learn more, stay up to date? Like it could be that we do a presentation to their staff, or their staff attends a COC meeting or a training.
And it's something that can get shared. It's not just a one-time thing. Like it's something that is created and then just given to everybody, not saying, hey, we're going to do this on this one particular day, you guys all have to come to our event. No, here's a little snippet, have it on YouTube, have it on share.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
that
that
part.
is one of the things that we might, that might end up getting formed. Jill, I see your question.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop using the word pre-pandemic, and I'm just going to say in the old days.
Yes, exactly. Back in the day.
Before the
tired.
never, never.
I'm tired of the P word.
I know.
In the old days, when you all used to do those COC meetings quarterly, it was such a great opportunity to bring a whole lot of different people into the room. And I just can remember so many times where people are like, oh, I didn't know you're doing that. And it was just such a great connection and collaboration between providers and the boots on the ground that, I'm hopeful something like that can happen going forward. And it could be based on the results from, the surveys, like what's missing. And that could feed your COC training opportunities and collaborative opportunities. And it doesn't have to be in person. It could be via Zoom, just to make it easier for everybody.
Yep.
As the monthly provider meeting that Mary and Shelby do really provide that for us. Definitely boost that. I've encouraged so many people to go attend that. But as I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the old, really bad 80s fast food training videos. We could do the COC versions of those and post them on YouTube. This is how you
I wanted to just amplify. So I see Amanda and Joe are saying, like, there's people in our community that want to be part of this work. Great. If you know what's like, tell me if there are things, and not right now, but like, let's talk offline. If there are things that are getting in the way, let's talk about it, because we are really this is part of what we're trying to do, is like, we're offering stipends for people to be sitting in these meetings.
It's a trust thing.
Okay.
They don't trust the system.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. So it really is people like Amanda and I, and who are in there with them, that trust factor. And I think that's what started the amplifiers, because they trust those amplifiers that we're going to reach out to. We can't do it. The system can't do it. We need to have that middle person or that middle entity bridge, which is what the amplifiers is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We're just not there yet.
And what I will say, the comment was particularly around working with CORE to do outreach. Most CORE staff have lived experience of homelessness, so we're really trying to definitely prioritize hiring with that regard. So I'm going to dig up a link, because we're always hiring. It's really a job that we want to recruit for.
The other thing I would just jump in there and just point out, a lot of our unhoused residents are utilizing our library system. And so that is just a super good opportunity. The trust is already there. The people are already there. They're already doing this work, is to get information in their hands, to factual information. And that's another great opportunity to connect people to 211 and the resources that are on there, is through our library systems.
Library is one of our amplifiers, and we have Rachel here that's also connected to the library. So totally signal boosting what you're saying, Jill. Amanda, I see your hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to comment on the hiring of CORE, people for CORE. They have a 2-year, you have to be not on their, not receiving services from CORE for 2 years before you can be hired, and that's a lot of a problem.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
So, I work with a lot of our graduates of our program, and 30% of more than 30% of our staff is formerly homeless. And when I reach out to a lot of people who want to help, who want to be a part of it, but they're so focused on building what they're focusing on. And so a lot of us that do the signal boost, I can go to them and I can get their opinions. Like, I know Amanda and Joe can go to people who want to help, who want to contribute, may not be available to do so, because of the relationships that we have. And at least in that way, we can bring more voices to the table for folks that for whatever reason aren't able to be directly here.
Well, and actually, I'm glad you said that, Wayne, because one of the things, if we get to the amplifier survey, you'll be able to see one of the things we're asking people is like, do you want to be more involved in this work? Like we want to get you as like a thought partner in developing these materials as like a sort of an on-ramp, right? That is something we're explicitly asking in the in the survey for people with lived experience. And like Amanda and Joe, like, you know, part of your power is that you have networks, right? So when this survey comes out, hopefully soon, like the idea is that you will, as trusted people, will be bringing those surveys out into the community and spreading the word about the opportunities to help, and also being like, look, here's a real tangible way for you to provide your input about what's needed, like from the very first moment that you become homeless. Inform how this stuff should look, what it should sound like, where it should be, who should be giving it out.
So this discussion makes me really want to raise the importance between the difference between those of us with lived experience of homelessness and peer support specialists. The tiny stream of people, even though it's a massive hole, it's a massive hole between the people and the system, but there is a stream of peer support specialists that need to be put into place. Not necessarily people with lived experience. People with lived experience is great. We need that in core. We need that perspective. But the people that we're talking about going out there and doing these surveys and getting the trust of the people, that's where peer specialists come in. It's a different, completely different kind of model. It's a completely different kind of outreach. And it's a whole nother conversation outside of this meeting here, but it just raises we have to start having that conversation between the difference of people with lived experience and peer support specialists, because they could be one and the same, but there's a particular training that goes with the peer specialists factor, not just people with lived experience.
Got it, thank you. Amanda, is your hand still up or is that from before? Okay.
That's from before, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, we have about 20 minutes left. Jamie, I want to pick your brain and see what you think is the most important. There's sort of 3 other things I was hoping we could do. So I wanted to go through the people with lived experience survey. Double check on the amplifier list to see if there's anybody else that we're missing, because my hope is next week, I would love to next week launch these surveys. Go ahead.
I think given that we're so close to time, I want to maybe hit the next steps first to see if we can talk about next meeting.
Oh, yes.
And in person and whatnot, logistics.
Yes.
And then we can come back because those are both pretty meaty topics.
Yes. Okay. So thank you, Jamie. I was like, I have brain gridlock. So council members know this. Other folks might not know this. The state law has recently changed and reverted back to, there's something called the Brown Act that requires all public meetings have their sort of appointed members be in person. Council on Homelessness is an official advisory board to the Council on to the Board of Supervisors. Therefore, council meetings and all of the committee meetings are now required by law starting March 1st to have those official council members physically be in person. It sucks. It's a mess. We don't have any control over it right now. So what we are working on behind the scenes is to make sure that
Jamie, you're fading in and out again.
Oh no, is that better? Can you still hear me? I don't know what's going on with my, okay. So we are working to set up, let me say for March, we have a physical meeting space where we can have a hybrid meeting. So the council members will need to physically be in person, but we will be able to have remote access for community members that want to participate. So that Zoom link is still going to be the same. It's just going to physically look different about what's on the screen because a group of us are going to be in person. That meeting date is still the same. I forget what it is, but it's in March and it will be March the 14th. Oh, I will have just come back. So it will be March 14th. Right, and we are working on a more consistent location, but we'll share that information when we have it. Jamie, is there anything you wanted to say?
I think
related to
it's
that
March
meeting?
16th, not the 14th. It's that Thursday, not Tuesday, right?
Tuesday.
16th.
The equity meeting is on Tuesday the 14th.
Oh, you're talking about the equity meeting. I'm sorry.
I know.
I thought you were talking about the council meeting.
No,
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yes. So for the purposes of this committee also has to be in person. And I was talking about this committee meeting in particular. But working group stuff, if there's any more working group meetings, that will all happen remotely.
What's the difference in Brown Act between the two? Like if there's stuff, is this once a month that we have to meet in person and then we can do a bunch of other stuff on Zoom? What's the deal?
Basically, if it's one of the official committees of the council, like equity, that has to physically be in person. But like the work, when we broke out some little working groups to just do a deep dive on some stuff, that was fine to be virtual. So like if there's like 3 people that get together to hammer out a survey that comes back to report to the committee, that part doesn't need to be in person, but the committee meetings have to be in person.
And Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but it also has to do with quorum of council and committee members. So if you, Kiva, Joe, Juno all want to be in that working group, I think that's enough committee members that we would then have to subject it to Brown Act.
Yes. So I don't think that's going to happen. We will avoid that problem, but yes.
So what you're saying is the equity committee has to work under very unequitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight, these are state regulations. They don't have anything to do with the county. The county really would, the county board of supervisors has asked all advisory bodies to remain hybrid for the public. And knowing the hardship it puts on our advisory body members, there is legislation in Sacramento that's trying to address it, but it doesn't have anything to do with the county. So this is beyond our ability to do anything about it other than comply with the state regulations.
And I'm hopeful about that legislation, but we have no idea if or when that will change. So yeah, things are fun right now in that regard.
But at the same time, we will be in a place that is a hybrid, so the community members can still listen, and it will be recorded. It's going to be shared out.
Yep.
Even though we quote unquote I don't like the idea that we have to mandatory be there in person, but that means, what does that mean? Oh, that's a whole nother conversation. Never mind. I'll keep myself out of it.
It's fine. I mean, I just want to let you know, like, we are fighting tooth and nail to maintain as much equity as possible. So we are I'm scrambling to find buildings where we can have hybrid meetings so that we can have as wide a variety of people as we do here that are not just council members, making sure that things are as accessible as possible. So, Jamie, are you on the same page as me of like, we're going to table this definitions conversation for a future meeting?
Yep, I think that makes sense. But just to speak to it a little bit, I think our goal with that is to set some, to make sure we're working from the same language. We've talked about this before. We had recommendations from C4. So I think what we'll end up doing is trying to provide some starter dough for y'all to react to around kind of key definitions when we talk about equity, having some shared language in the council. And then we'll come back and kind of brainstorm and tweak and do our usual process before settling on what we want to adopt.
And I'll just flag, I pulled the definitions that were used when we had C4 Innovations come and do an equity assessment of our system of care and do some trainings for us. There are some definitions that they've used that I basically pulled in preparation for this meeting that are in the meeting packet. So that might be, if you feel like you want to nerd out and go look at stuff before we have that conversation. I want to check in because we didn't have time to go through the people with lived experience survey. I'm thinking, I don't know the best next step because we can incorporate a lot of the comments that we had from the amplifier survey that I think will carry over. There's a lot of pieces that are very similar. We do have 15 minutes left here. So my ideally, we would have folks look at it enough to sign off for us to launch these next week. Do folks want to take the 15 minutes and look at the amplifier survey now for those questions that are new? Okay, great. Me too. All right, let me see if I can figure out. Okay. So this is it showing for you the experience of homelessness?
Mhm.
Okay, so we are saying up front, we want to get input from people who have been at risk of, are currently experienced, or formerly experienced homelessness about the following topics. So what type of information should be on new materials? What graphics and images should be on new materials? And how to connect people to homeless services. That's sort of like the, sorry. Oops, this is, so we're saying the survey is voluntary and we think it will take 5 to 10 minutes to complete and your personal information will not be shared with anyone. So we start out by asking, and this is going to be a forced choice. There's going to be some skip patterns. So if somebody says, I've never been at risk of or experienced literal homelessness, it's just going to take them right to the end of the survey. We really only want to hear from people that would have that lived experience and can inform this process. So I have been, or I am at risk of losing my housing, I've experienced. So one question is like, are these questions worded in a way that makes sense?
Jamie, just in the interest of time, I think we should probably just go through and come back and like circle the top line.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so have you ever used homeless or housing services? Yes or no? If yes, how did you learn about or connect with them? If no, why did you not use them? So this kind of speaks to that question of like people didn't know, or they heard that people were treating them like crap, so they didn't even want to bother. So we left that open. Actually, I think this one we might want to edit to have some of those other choices, so that again, people might be more likely to answer. So some of the options that we had in the other survey. Again, I haven't gotten a chance to update this. So these, what do you know about how to access housing or homeless services? What do you know about what happens after? We have the what do you want? So we're asking what specific information, words, and images do you want to see, and what things do you not want to see? We've already gotten some information about that, like some people really don't like the word homeless. Well, that's really important. If we're going to change the language, if we get a lot of people that say that, we should change the language. Is there anything specific that would help catch your attention? I'm going to just make this bold. What type of information? So we'll make this mirror what we talked about in the other survey. Are there other things you want to know? What tools would be most useful? This is the same as the other one. So what about you? We're asking, where do you find your support and why do you trust them? So this is kind of getting at amplifiers and kind of what Joe and Amanda were saying, like there may be somebody who's like kind of an encampment that we don't know, but if we can build a relationship, they can be an incredible amplifier.
You would answer that question differently if you're currently living with homelessness. You would answer that very differently.
Yeah.
I like how that's open-ended to allow for that. Good.
And then we have where do you live, work, or stay most of the time? So we have all these. This is, I think, this I got from our red team. In terms of the list. Do you identify with any of the following characteristics? So we might want to word this differently, but basically we're saying this is not going to be publicly shared. We just want to make sure we're getting input from a diverse group. so we have all those categories we talked about in the other.
Would you just simply ask, how do you identify?
Uh-huh.
Check all
Yep.
that apply.
Totally. Does that resonate with people as a simple way to ask this?
Amanda said yes in the chat.
Okay, great.
Jamie, just real quick on the question, there's a star, meaning you have to answer. So you should include
yes.
None of the above, just in case.
Oh, thank you. Yep, I appreciate that.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Contact information. And you help share this survey with people. We are looking for people to tell us what they think about our materials and communication. So this is where we're like, hey, can we pull you into the ring for more work? And we're saying we're going to provide a $20 gift card for each hour spent helping. Their name, their email, phone number, and then we are offering a drawing. Oh, I forgot to mention that. So we're going to offer, if people want to submit their name and information, then we'll be offering a gift card drawing where we'll pull up, we'll put all the names in a hat and have a gift card that we'll then reach out and give to them. So that is this survey in a nutshell. So we're clearly going to clean up some stuff from based on the other one. So Amanda's saying, I think you need to separate those experiencing and have experienced. Do we need to go back? Because that's a big one. Let's just make sure we're going to get this one right. Okay, I have been. Oh, so Amanda, one of the things we're trying to capture, this is like being at risk. So trying to get at risk versus experiencing housing instability. Literal. So we're trying to kind of capture these like 3 experiences. So this is maybe like you might get kicked out.
Aren't those the HUD definitions? And I don't know if we need to explain those definitions, I guess is what I was asking.
Well, that's a good, so we have housing instability is like couch surfing or living with friends. So this might be like facing eviction. Are there other ways that we would describe
Roommate
this?
conflict.
Go ahead, Wayne.
I'm wondering. I'm wondering if we should leave those broad and let people choose. I learned, according to HUD's definition, I was homeless a lot longer than I thought when I was living in a garage, and I was absolutely convinced I wasn't at that time. And it blew my mind. So just, I don't know. I could see either way. I could see either way. I don't. Yeah.
So like, maybe I'll say like in a shelter on the street, I mean, I don't think that's an uncommon experience, like in a garage.
And Amanda clarified in the chat that she thinks that adding a category for people who are right now currently experiencing homelessness is different than having it bundled together experience versus current.
Got it. Yes.
So we can work to build that in. I think that's a good point.
Okay. I know we have 3 minutes left. Are there any other big things that caught your attention? And again, this is in that packet if you want to, if it's easier.
What was the first question that you were questioning at the very beginning? There was something that caught my attention.
This is the description.
No, I think it was the first question.
Okay, so do you have a lived experience of homelessness? This is like, have you ever used homeless or housing services?
I don't know what it was.
Okay. What do you know? What do you know about what happens after someone reaches out? So I'll probably make these mirror the other one. So this is like, what do you want? Information, words, images that you want to see and don't want to see. Things that would catch your attention. So this is really going to help guide what things look like. And then this is going to be like the what kinds of information, and we'll clean that up to match the other one. all the different kinds of tools, about where people find their support.
Can we, this one here, you had pointed out these particular cities on purpose based off of, you said the red team, right?
Mhm.
I'm wondering if we would keep with these same identifying cities when we're identifying the central, south central,
exactly.
east, far east, like, are these the cities that we're trying to identify because we already have them? Is that why they're there?
Yeah, so this Jamie Klinger gave me this list, and so I guess this is a question.
I like
so
the list.
So would it make more sense for you as like a normal person not thinking through the system lens? Would you say like, I live in West County, East County, and go look for your city in each of those regions? Or would you just like look for your city or your town?
As a person in the community, I'm just looking for the city. As a
Okay,
person
so we're
in the
not going to break
system,
it out.
yeah, as a person in the system, I would be
Mhm.
looking for regional.
Okay,
And
You
what
could
this,
list them both.
what this list encompasses, sorry, Wayne, not to speak over you, we could list them both and kind of, put in parentheses West, is it should encompass all of the cities and like the major census designated
Mhm.
places.
Yeah.
So,
Contra Costa Center, Blackhawk, Briones, Saranac, Parkmead. Yeah, those are like census designated places.
So the census, I think that's what I think that's what.
Can I
should we
clarify?
identify?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
Jill.
Joe, can I
No, go ahead.
clarify? Because I had conversations with Jamie about this, because there was one community in particular that was missing from there. So this is all the major recognized areas that have a certain population. So anything that's smaller, so if it only has a population of a few hundred people, it's not listed here. So this is both cities and unincorporated communities.
But like Pacheco's missing, right? I'm like, I just noticed that.
Well, Pacheco should most definitely be there. And
I agree. Okay,
yeah.
so I'll double check this list too.
And that's not part of District 2 anymore, so I didn't pay attention to that one. But so yeah, so it has to do with population and recognizable areas, and I think it's important just working with the public that they don't really necessarily know what part of the county they live in. They know what area they're from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I think that in the parentheses, when we're on the other survey and we to put the cities in those parentheses,
yes, exactly,
that it should identify the census
sure
list as well.
Yep. Yeah, there's some things missing on here, like North Richmond. Yeah, there's definitely. So we'll clean this up.
That's great.
Okay, we're at 4:01. So the plan is we are going to do a bunch of cleanup back here. How do folks feel about us doing the cleanup? Do you feel like you need to see it again before it goes out officially?
I'd like to.
Okay. So I can send, maybe what I'll do is send it out to this group for like last comments after we get them as close to done as we think. And I'll set a deadline for comments, and then we can aim for maybe next Friday to send it out. Sound good?
Or
can I ask a quick question based off of it's nothing to do with this. I know we're supposed to be out of here. If we start doing in person, are we going to be getting these like printed packets instead of email? Because like I think that would be amazing. To get printed packets, I would go to the meeting specifically for the printed packets.
I will print you anything, Joe. That makes it easier for you. Yes. Jamie, what was your...
Joe, you're a cheap date.
And it's Valentine's Day. I love it.
I was just gonna say we probably wouldn't send it next Friday just because from a distribution point, the long holiday weekend.
Oh, so probably I'm not even working next Friday. Yeah, thank you. Well, it'll go out soon. We'll work on the date.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. We got a huge amount of work done. I really appreciate this committee. You guys are doing a lot, and all the community folks that are here. This is fantastic. Stay tuned. We will have minutes. We will have more notes. We will be in touch.
Yeah, this is awesome, everybody. By far the most exciting committee I'm on right now. So.
I agree. Thank you, Jill, for all of your technical support on the county hoopla. I'm sure you're struggling as much as we are.
County hoopla.
Queen of county hoopla. I love it.
Yes, and just speaking for myself, I don't blame the county for all the additional miles my car is gonna put in.
Oh my God. Everyone
I
is
know
mad
Well,
you
about
have
it.
to deal with more
One of
than
the
I do.
benefits of the pandemic was that county and Jamie, you guys can probably attest to this, was the decrease in expenses. Because county employees get paid mileage. And so the county saved an awful lot of money on paying mileage with these virtual meetings. So
Now they're gonna have to pay for Kleenex and mileage. I think everybody's having a hard time. We've all adjusted to this new schedule and new way of doing things. So
I like that I can be more available to participate more, you know, I don't know
Yeah.
if I can do this many committees having to
I
drive
know.
everywhere.
I know.
well,
I know.
and keeping in mind that there are abilities to zoom in when needed.
Twice a year.
Couple
twice a
of
year,
times a year per committee. So
Oh, it's per committee.
per
We did not
committee.
have that information.
oh yeah, no, every meeting. So
Oh,
every
Jill,
committee
you
you
just
participate
made-
in.
Jill,
you
you
made
just
my-
That's
oh,
amazing.
And there's-
That changes
there's-
everything.
Yeah, there's two different opportunities to do that. And so
Wow.
Jamie, do you guys
I need to
have-
talk to you because
do you
that-
have that memo from Lauren that sort of breaks it all out that you've shared?
yes,
Okay.
but it wasn't clear to me that that was per meeting.
It's
like per
about as
type of.
clear as mud to me as well. So.
Okay, good. I was
But
like,
did you get the spreadsheet?
the like
So
three, the three
Yeah.
column.
Yeah, yeah.
I have point of order question. If you quit a committee
Yeah.
and then rejoin the committee, do you get 2 more? Is it like a Mario level up, like eating a mushroom, you
2
know?
for 12.
Wait, working on the
period.
loophole.
We are all trying to figure out how to game the
Wait,
system. I'm
Wait a
telling
minute,
you.
isn't this the equity committee? What are we doing right now? Like, how do we get over on the system? All right. I love it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Contact your governor, contact your legislative representative and let them know how much of a hardship this is
Oh,
on.
I have
all
a-
of
I just want to
you.
serve well. That's what I want to do. I just want to serve well. That's,
Yes.
you
I have a memo that I need to finish to send to Erica Jensen because she asked for it. I was like, I am happy to tell you all the ways this sucks for us.
know.
Truly.
Awesome. Okay.
That's great.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.